the milk in the morning, singing the same old song. Rises the moon, though the bed is the sun.
Good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Lauren Brooke Ellis. I directed tonight's Readers Theater, and I also wrote the script for it, so we're really excited to share this with you. We know you could be at home watching NASCAR, but we appreciate you supporting live theater. I'm going to go ahead and give this warning first. There is no intermission for this show, so if you need a cocktail or two or three, grab them now because the bar is going to close in a moment. We do want to thank our sponsors, Martinsville Surgical Associates. They have made this season possible, and we're so grateful for their support. We also have a great partnership with Renewal Brewing next door. You got a chip on your way in. If you take it into Renewal after the show, they will give you $1 off your first draft. We have bathrooms and emergency exits to the back and right and left, so kind of like a flight stewardess. There we are. So check those out. We do want to announce that we have auditions for our piano bar on November 9th, so check the website and Facebook for more information on that. We're going to ask you to go ahead and turn off your cell phones, but before you do, check it on Facebook and let everyone know you're uptown at the theater. Creating FOMO is a great way to support the arts and build an audience. So we hope you enjoy the show. Please enjoy. Thank you.
I put myself a hero of a very high degree. I ran home and 6 of them were running after me. I'm a member of the Midnight Crew. I'm a night owl and a white bird too. Home with the milk in the morning, singing the same old song. Rises the moon, though the bed is the sun. I leave the
So come on down for deals you'll die for.
Get the job done right the first time. Call.
With your support, you can send plain, bland, unseasoned rice to a starving child in...
Am I my sister? How could you?
Sunday, Sunday, Sunday.
Get her what she really wants.
I'm always walking after midnight.
Cloudy night with a low in that.
No down payment.
Bringing you the best rock.
Greetings to you, foolish listeners. We interrupt your regularly scheduled mediocrity and normalcy to bring you chills, thrills, and haunts. Once a year, on Halloween, we, your ghostly entertainers, are able to break down the barriers of space and time and broadcast this descent into madness, degradation, and fear. Who am I? I'm your worst nightmare, a demon from...
Tell them the truth.
Well, I'm a radio disc jockey, but I'm dead and broadcasting from beyond.
And we're his spooky minions, here to help tell the stories.
I haven't gotten there yet.
Do not call us minions. That's degrading to our noble profession. We are actors.
Is that any less degrading?
I am not a minion. I have an equity card.
That getting you a lot of work right now?
It's a living.
We're all dead.
This is going off the rails, all right?
Hey, let me finish! We are a cursed group, bound by a spiritual connection to this radio, to terrify and amaze audiences once a year until we are once again pulled back into the deep and formless void of eternity. This year, the stories we have to tell are so shocking, so disturbing, so deeply unsettling.
Oh, wait! Did you get that memo from the producers?
No.
You should check this out really quick.
A cease and desist.
Because there's nothing scarier than copyright law!
I have an idea.
So this year we will bring you Tales of Horror from the public domain.
That means they're old.
We don't need high-tech special effects or million-dollar studios to chill your bones. We'll go back in time to a time where death lurked around every corner and fear was as simple as tapping into your imagination.
Cobwebs and shadows and candlelight.
Black cats and torment.
Communicable diseases and hubris.
All of these horrific trappings and more abound in this, the tale of the Mask of the Red Death.
The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleedings at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest span which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow man. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste.
A strong and lofty wall surrounded it.
The walls had gates of iron.
The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair from without or of frenzy from within.
The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think.
The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisations, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were cards, there was beauty, there was wine.
All these and security were within.
Without was the Red Death.
It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, the Prince Prospero entertained 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here, the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love for the bazaar.
The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect.
To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color were in accordance with the prevailing hue of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vivid blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple.
The third was green throughout, and so were the casements.
The fourth was furnished and lit with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet.
The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue.
But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro, or depended from the roof.
There was no light
Of any kind.
emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers.
But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier or a fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass, and so glaringly illumined the room.
And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when its minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came forth from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep, and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang,
It was observed that the giddiest grew pale.
And that the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation.
But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly and making whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming the clock should produce in them no similar emotions. And then after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock. And then there was the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before.
but in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decors of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There were some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great feat, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the costumes of the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm.
There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments.
There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions.
There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not that of a little that might have been discussed.
To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams.
And these, the dreams, writhe in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And, anon, there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet. And then, momentarily, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chimes die away. They've endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and ride to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture. For the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-covered panes, and the blackness of the sable drape appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life. And the revel went whirlingly on until at length there sounded the 12th hour upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told. And the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock. And thus it happened, perhaps, that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who reveled. And thus again it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chimes had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there rose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive at first of disapproval and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited. But the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jest, there are matters of which no jest can be properly made. The whole company indeed seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger, neither wit nor prosperity existed.
The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to toe in the habiliments of the grave.
The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat.
And yet, all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage.
Who dares?
He demanded hoarsely of the group that stood around him.
Who dares thus to make mockery of our woes? Uncase the varlet, so that we may know whom we have to hang tomorrow at sunrise from the battlements. Will no one stir at my bidding? Stop him, and strip him, I say, of those red vestures of sacrilege.
It was in the eastern, or blue chamber, which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the murmur had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person. And while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterrupted, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first.
Through the blue chamber to the purple.
Through the purple to the green.
Through the green to the orange.
Through this again to the white.
And even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him.
It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddened with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him, on account of the deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly round and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming into the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterward fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the murmur whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mass which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. One by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay. And the flames of the tripod expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
Prince Prospero, for all his finery and wealth, really got ensnared in his pride, didn't he? Now every story must inevitably end, no matter what we might do to prevent the untimely beckoning of death. And now, a word from our sponsors.
Does the thought of missing out on important conversations and events make you nervous? Rude, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am, but why do you say that I am mad? I didn't say that you were mad. The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heavens and in the earth.
Okay, well that's thanks to Vulture hearing aids.
Vulture? Like the old man's eye?
Just stick to the script. Yes, Vulture hearing aids are the best in business. Perfect for getting you back in the swing of hearing everything around you and making you a central part of the action.
Like a heartbeat?
A heartbeat?
I mean, a clock, like in the other room.
You're giving extremely strange vibes.
It grew louder, louder, louder.
That's how you know it's working.
Was it possible they heard not?
No. If they're using
everything. They heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror.
What are you talking about?
I felt that I must scream or die.
Please don't die.
And hark, and now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder.
This thing really works, ladies and gentlemen.
Villains, disassemble no more, I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, it is the beating of his hideous heart.
We're gonna call the cops and be right back, ladies and gentlemen.
Alter hearing aids. For hearing so acute, it's maddening.
We now return to the deluge of horrors and mystery. Our next tale is a Gothic masterpiece. Pay close attention to the horrific trimmings of each description. Full moons, creaky castles, and crooked trees mark the scene of our most eerie delights. This story abounds in decay and disintegration, the gory and grotesque isolation.
Hey, there are some young kids here.
And family values. Prepare for the horror of the fall of the House of Usher.
Roderick Usher, who I had known as a boy, was now ill, and he had asked me to come help him. When I arrived, I felt something strange and fearful about the great old house, about the lake in front of it, and about Usher himself. He appeared not like a human being, but like a spirit that had come back from beyond the grave. It was an illness, he said, from which he would surely die. He called his sickness fear.
I have no fear of pain, but only of the fear of its result, of terror. I feel that the time will soon arrive when I must lose my life and my mind and my soul together at some last battle with that horrible enemy, fear.
I learned also, but slowly, and through broken words with doubtful meaning, another strange fact about the condition of Usher's mind. He had certain sick fears about the house in which he lived, and he had not stepped out of it for many, many years. He felt that the house, with its gray walls and the quiet lake around it, had somehow, through the long years, gotten a strong hold on his spirit. He said, however, that much of the gloom which lay so heavily on him was probably caused by something more plainly to be seen, by the long continued illness, indeed, the coming death of a dearly loved sister, his only companion for many years. Except for himself, she was the last member of his family on earth.
When she dies, I will be the last of the old family, the House of Usher.
While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, for so she was called, passed slowly through a distant part of the room, and without seeing that I was there, went on. I looked at her with a complete and wondering surprise, and with some fear, and yet I found I could not explain my feelings to myself. My eyes followed her. When she came to a door and it closed behind her, my eyes turned to the face of her brother. He had put his face in his hands, and I could see only then that the thin fingers through which his tears were flowing were whiter than ever before.
The illness of the Lady Madeline had long been beyond the help of her doctors. She seemed to care about nothing. Slowly, her body had grown thin and weak, and often for a short period she would fall into a sleep, like the sleep of the dead.
So far, she had not been forced to stay in bed, but by the evening of the day that I arrived at the house, the power of her destroyer, as her brother told me that night, was too strong for her. I learned that my one side of her would probably be the last that I would have, that the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. For several days following, her name was not spoken by either myself or Usher, and during this period I was busy with efforts to lift my friend out of his sadness and gloom. At last one evening, he told me that the Lady Madeline was alive no more. He said he was going to keep her body for a time in one of the many vaults inside the walls of the building. The worldly reason he gave for this was one that I felt I had to agree with. He had decided to do this because of the nature of her illness, because of the strange interest and the questions of her doctors, and because of the great distance to the graveyard where members of his family were placed in the earth. We too carried her body to its resting place. The vault in which we placed it was small and dark, and in ages past it must have seen strange and bloody things. It lay deep below that part of the building where I myself slept. The thick door was of iron, and because of its great weight, made a loud, hard sound when it was opened and closed. As we placed the Lady Madeline into this room of horror, I saw for the first time the great likeness between brother and sister. An usher told me then that they were twins, that they had been born on the same day, and for that reason, the understanding between them had always been great, and the tie that held them together very, very strong. We looked down at the dead face one last time, and I was filled with wonder. As she lay there, the Lady Madeline looked not dead, but asleep, still soft and warm, though to the touch cold as the stones around us.
This program is brought to you by the Annabelle Lee Travel Agency. Have you ever wanted to explore a kingdom by the sea?
I've always wanted to go to a kingdom by the sea.
Take a trip so beautiful that the angels will come in it.
That sounds like a bad idea.
Call now for a special honeymoon package.
Is it cold in here? Is it just me?
Honey cannot be refunded due to hubris or interference of strong winds. Be the envy of all on your Insta feed. Nothing could go wrong by the kingdom of the sea.
Why do I feel that if I go, I won't come back?
Hush up, kid. Go build a sandcastle.
Annabelle Lee Travel Agency is not responsible for bad weather, sudden illness, mounting medical bills, demon the water, the discovering of souls, believing their eyes following you, or feeling the urge to sleep by a corpse in a tomb. Please seek immediate medical assistance if you wake up with chills or a harsh cough.
Now back to our program.
I was visiting an old friend of mine, Roderick Usher, in his old stone house, his palace, where a feeling of death hung on the air. I saw how fear was pressing on his heart and on his mind. Now, his only sister, the Lady Madeline, had died, and we had put her body in its resting place, in a room inside the cold walls of the palace, a damp, dark vault, a fearful place. As we looked down upon her face, I saw that there was a strong likeness between the two.
Indeed, we were born on the same day, and the tie between us has always been strong.
We did not long look down at her, for fear and wonder filled our hearts. There was still a little color in her face, and there seemed to be a smile on her lips. We closed the heavy iron door and returned to the rooms above, which were hardly less gloomy than the vault. And now, a change came in the sickness of my friend's mind.
He went from room to room with a hurried step. His face was, if possible, whiter and more ghastly than before, and the light in his eyes had gone. The trembling in his voice seemed to show the greatest fear.
At times he sat looking at nothing for hours, as if listening to some sound I could not hear. I felt his condition slowly but certainly gaining power over me. I felt that his wild ideas were becoming fixed in my own mind. As I was going to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day, after we placed the Lady Madeline within the vault, I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep did not come while the hours passed. My mind fought against the nervousness. I tried to believe that much, if not all of what I felt, was due to
The gloomy room, to the dark wall coverings which in a rising wind moved on the walls.
But my efforts were useless. A trembling I could not stop filled my body, and fear without reason caught my heart. I sat up, looked into the darkness of the room, listening, I do not know why, to certain low sounds which came when the storm was quiet. A feeling of horror lay upon me like a heavy weight. I put on my clothes and began walking nervously around the room. I had been walking for a very short time when I heard a light step coming to my door. I knew it was Usher. In a moment, I saw him at my door, as usual, very white. But there was a wild laugh in his eyes. Even so, I was glad to have his company.
And have you not seen it?
He hurried to one of the windows and opened it to the storm. The force of the entering wind nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a stormy but beautiful night and wildly strange. The heavy, low-hanging clouds which seemed to press down upon the house flew from all directions against each other, always returning and never passing away in the distance. With their great thickness, they cut off all light from the moon and stars, but we could see them because they were lighted from below by the air itself, which we could see rising from the dark lake and from the stones of the house itself.
You must not. You shall not look out at this.
I said to Usher as I led him from the window to a seat.
This appearance has been seen in other places too. Perhaps the lake is the cause. Let us close the window because the air is cold. Here is one of the stories you like best. I will read and you shall listen, and thus we will live through this terrible night together.
The old book, which I picked up, was one written by a fool for fools to read, and it was not, in truth, one that Usher liked. It was, however, the only one within easy reach. He seemed to listen quietly. Then I came to a part of the story in which a man, a strong man, full of wine, begins to break down a door, and the sound of the dry wood as it breaks can be heard through all the forest around him. Here, I stopped, for it seemed to me that from some very distant part of the house, sounds came to my ears like those of which I had just been reading. It must have been this likeness that had made me notice them, for the sounds themselves, with the storm still increasing, were nothing to stop or interest me. I continued the story and read how the man, now entering through the broken door, discovers a strange and terrible animal of the kind so often found in these old stories. He strikes it, and it falls with such a cry that he has to close his ears with his hands. Here again I stopped. There could be no doubt. This time I did hear a distant sound. I tried to control myself so that my friend would see nothing of how I felt. I was not certain that he had heard the sound, although he had clearly changed in some way. He had slowly moved his chair so that I could not see him well. I did see that his lips were moving, as if he were speaking to himself. His head had dropped forward, but I knew he was not asleep, for his eyes were open, and he was moving his body from side to side. I began reading again, and quickly came to a part of the story where a heavy piece of iron falls on the stone floor with a ringing sound. These words had just passed my lips when I heard clearly, but from far away, a loud ringing sound, as if something of iron had indeed fallen heavily upon a stone floor, or as if an iron door had closed. I lost control of myself completely and jumped up from my chair. Usher still sat, moving a little from side to side. His eyes were turned to the floor. I rushed to his chair. As I placed my hand on his shoulder, I felt that his whole body was trembling. A sickly smile touched his lips. He spoke in a low, quick, and nervous voice, as if he did not know I was there.
Yes, I heard it. Many minutes, many hours, many days have I heard it. But I did not dare to speak. We have put her living in the vault. Did I not say that my senses were too strong? I heard her first movements many days ago, yet I did not dare to speak. And now, that story. But the sounds were hers. Oh, where shall I run? She is coming to ask why I put her in there too soon. I hear her footsteps on the stairs. I hear the heavy beating of her heart.
Here, he jumped up and cried as if he were giving up his soul.
I tell you, she now stands at the door.
The great door to which he was pointing now slowly opened. It was the work of the rushing wind, perhaps.
But no, outside that door, a shape shape did stand, the tall figure in its grave clothes of the Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white dress, and the signs of her terrible efforts to escape were upon every part of her thin form. For a moment she remained trembling at the door, then with a low cry, she fell heavily in upon her brother. In her pain as she died at last, she carried him down with her, down to the floor. He too was dead, killed by his own fear. I rushed from the room.
I rushed from the house.
I ran. The storm was around me in all its strength as I crossed the bridge.
Suddenly, a wild light moved along the ground at my feet, and I turned to see where it could have come from, for only the great house and its darkness were behind me.
The light was that of the full moon,
Of a blood-red moon.
which was now shining through that break in the front wall, that crack which I thought I had seen when I first saw the palace.
Then, only a little crack, it now widened as I watched. A strong wind came rushing over me.
The whole face of the moon appeared.
I saw the great walls falling apart. There was a long and stormy shouting sound.
And the deep black lake closed darkly over all that remained.
All that remained of the house of Usher.
That Roderick Usher can't seem to catch a break, can he? We have one more gruesome tale for you, following this brief word from another sponsor.
Pride, folly, luck, fortune. Our most potent offering to the world of fine sherries thus far arrives in a beautiful cask. So beautiful, your friends will hardly believe you actually have it.
Amontillado. You have a cask of Amontillado, a full cask? I don't believe it.
Believe it. Let this Amontillado take you on a journey, a reverie of revelry, swirling through your brain until you quite forget where you are.
Where am I?
That doesn't matter now. What matters is the sweet depth of flavor, the potency of the alcohol, the Palomino grapes. Are you quite all right?
Never better.
With the Amontillado in your glass, you will be transported away from reality.
Hey, are you bricking me in?
And into the magic of each moment.
I don't know if you're bricking me in or not, but it's getting dark.
Let Amontillado help you delve into your wildest fantasies.
Too dark to see.
Especially if they're revenge fantasies.
I feel like I'm knocking on Montresor's walls.
Savor each sip like it's your last.
Help!
Nemo me impune lacessit. No one provokes me and gets away with it.
I feel our time together is growing short. Soon we will be pulled back into our eternal rest. We're boundless souls with one purpose from beyond. What do you want from me? This next tale is one of most bitter remorse and madness. This is not for the faint of heart or weak of stomach. This story is one of a beloved pet. Maybe you have one, through who no fault of their own falls victim to human madness. Though, pay careful heed, revenge frequently comes from unlikely places.
For the most wild, just most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not. But tomorrow I die. And today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before this world,
Plainly, succinctly,
And without comment.
A series of mere household events.
in their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented a little bit of horror. Hereafter, perhaps some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace, some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary cessation of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of an animal that goes directly to your heart. I married early and was happy to find in my spouse a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, he lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds and goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The latter was
Remarkably large.
A beautiful animal, entirely black.
Sagacious to an astonishing degree.
in speaking of his intelligence, my spouse, who was at heart not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that he was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than it just happens just now to be remembered. Pluto was the cat's name. It was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me whenever I went about the house. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worst. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language and even offer personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain him from maltreating him, and I made no scruple of maltreating the others when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length Pluto even began to experience the effects of my ill temper.
One night, returning home,
Much intoxicated.
From one of my haunts about town, I fancied the cat avoided my presence. I seized it.
when in his fright he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth.
The fury of a demon instantly possessed me.
I knew myself no longer.
My original soul seemed at once to take flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence gin-nurtured thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by its throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes out of its socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder.
While I penned the damnable atrocity.
When reason returned with the morning, which I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty, but my soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess and soon drowned in wine all the memory of the deed.
In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered.
The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance.
But he no longer appeared to suffer any pain.
He went about the house as usual, but as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach.
I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature that had which so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account. Who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or silly action for no more reason than he knows that he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination to violate that which is law merely because we understand it to be so? The spirit of perverseness, I sang, came to my final overthrow. It was unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself.
To offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only.
This urged me to continue and finally consummate the injury which I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cool blood, I slipped a noose around its neck and hung it from a tree.
Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with bitterest remorse at my heart.
Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense.
Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin.
A deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. On the night of the day of which his cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that we made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. The exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to it having recently been spread. About the wall, a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words
strange, singular,
and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if engraven in vast relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope around the animal's neck. When I first beheld the apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not thus fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy.
For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat.
And during this period there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal and to look for another pet of the same species and somewhat similar appearance to which supply its place. One night as I sat, half stupefied, in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to a black object. I approached it and touched it with my hand.
It was a black cat.
A very large one, fully as large as Pluto.
And closely resembling him in every respect except one.
Pluto didn't have a white hair on any portion of his body, but this cat, although large, had an indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of his breast. Upon his touch, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice.
This, then, was the creature of which I was in search. I offered to purchase it from the landlord and neighbors, but these people
made no claim to it.
Knew nothing of it.
Had never seen it before.
When I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty, preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to seek silently from its odious presence, and from the breath of pestilence. What added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived
of one of its eyes.
With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. At times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I'm almost ashamed to own the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me. The reader will remember that its mark of white hair, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of an outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this above all, why I loathed and dreaded the monster. It was now the image of a hideous, ghastly thing, the gallows. Oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime and of agony and of death!
And a brute beast,
whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me.
For me, fashioned in the image of the high God. So much insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day or by night I knew the blessing of rest anymore. I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, an incarnate nightmare eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of fury. One day, my husband accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit.
The cat followed me and exasperated me to madness.
Uplifting an axe and forgetting in my wrath the chidal striate which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished.
But this blow was arrested by the hand of the spouse.
Goaded by the interference which were raised more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from his grasp and buried the axe into his brain. He fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by one of the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind.
At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire.
At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar.
Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box, as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house.
Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of those.
I determined to wall it up in the cellar. For a purpose such as the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the course, and wall up the whole as before so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I finished, the wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. Here at last, then, my labor had not been in vain.
The next step was to look for the beast, which had been the cause of so much wretchedness.
For I had at length firmly reserved to put it to death.
Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate.
But the crafty animal had been alarmed at my balance and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It's impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which in the absence of the detested creature occasioned. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since the introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. Slept even with a bird of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. Upon the 4th day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored, and at length, for the 3rd or the 4th time, they descended into the cellar. My heart beat calmly as that one who slumbers in innocence. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee of my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say if one word by way of triumph and to render doubly sure that their assurance of my guiltlessness. Gentlemen,
She said at last as the party ascended the steps.
I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. I may say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together.
And here,
Through the mere frenzy of bravado,
She rapped heavily with the cane that she held in her hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse.
But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch-fiend!
No sooner had the reverberations of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb.
by a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream.
Utterly anomalous and inhuman.
a howl.
A wailing shriek,
Half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell.
conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in the damnation.
Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall.
For one instant, the party upon the stairs remained motionless, through extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head,
With red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman.
I had rolled the monster up within the tomb!
At the close of this tale, this ghostly crew must now return to unknown realms. We were honored to spend this time with you, shocking, disturbing, and scaring you with grotesque spirits, pits of madness, and depths of humanity present in these tales. Your attention and rapt care were deeply appreciated as we regaled you with woe, despair, insanity, and horror. Pay close attention in the days to come. You never know what a neighbor is hiding or what a friend might be scheming. Until next year, good night and happy Halloween!
Wait. Did we forget to do the raven?
Oh, son of a